Welcome to Culturistic, culture conversations for the future of our world. Given the topics discussed, the following messages may be triggering or controversial. We kindly request that any comments remain polite, respectful, and productive. As a disclaimer, the messages from the speakers are their own and not a representation of their organizations, demographic, or subgroup. Please join us in continuing the conversation and welcome again to Culturistic.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. So for our very first episode of Culturistic, we launched this in order to have kind of a modern conversation about any culture topics, diversity, equity, inclusion, topics in the workplace, things like that. And I'm joined today by Margaret. So Margaret, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Super excited and a little nervous to have these conversations recorded. But I think that they're very important conversations that we should have.
Yeah, so we were having a lot of really good conversations with each other, and we were saying that, hey, you know what? We've been talking for hours about this stuff. One of these days, we just need to go ahead and hit record on them, and obviously in a much more casual setting. We always do such formal podcasts and interviews and stuff like that that we just wanted to show, hey, this is a real world conversation. One of the conversations we're recently having was about creating a sense of belonging in our corporations. So a problem that we all have is that in our companies, obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big thing right now, but we're so bad at it. And why are we so bad at it? What can we do to improve it? It's something that really, really annoys me. The modern version of diversity, equity, inclusion, we almost exclude in the journey to include, where we have different groups of people that will go together and form a community, and then they'll become an echo chamber amongst themselves. And we talked the other day about how there's a few places, like we talk about safe spaces a lot, but there's a few places that should never be a safe space. For me, I think universities are not a safe space, and places of work are not a safe space, because it's a place for you to ultimately, we love our employees. We always want to take care of our employees, but often it's for a purpose. We want to take care of our employees in order for us to drive the business forward, because ultimately we're all agents of the business. Belonging is important because that's when we function best together, when we are a tribe, when we can pursue things together, when we can identify a common enemy together and then attack it. We were just having this conversation last night, so a lot of this will be repeat for that. But when we can identify what the enemy is, we're not looking at each other as the enemy, which I think happens way too much. That inevitably, oh, so and so gave me a bad look, or someone said something about me, started a rumor about me, or why was I not invited to this meeting? It becomes very personal. It's a persistent challenge, but I'll pose a question to you of, do you think that belonging starts with the team or with the leadership?
I think it starts with the leadership, but it's almost like at the same time too, because whatever team you're going on should already be under that leadership and the culture should have already been created. I think it starts with leadership, but I also believe it's almost simultaneously, right? Because whatever team you are joining that is already under that leadership, the culture should already be there for that. But I wanted to go back to what you said at first, like at the beginning of the conversation. You said, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you say that work is not one of the places for safe space?
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, I know I'm
I want
saying
you
that
to unpack
controversially.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want you to unpack that before I share my thoughts on that, because I feel like we can't just skip over that.
For me, a team is a tribe. And my basis for a tribe, I tell this to my team, I tell this to even our clients that we work with, that with your team being a tribe, if you think about humans biologically being built to be in hunter gatherer tribes of about 50 people, that everything was dangerous, that the hunt for food was dangerous, making sure that you had enough water was dangerous, that
Hmm.
you don't need to all be the same person. As a matter of fact, that would destroy your organization or your tribe if you all were the same person, because we can't all be hunters, we can't all be builders, we can't all have a specific skill set and be a certain thing, which to me is the entire basis of diversity. That diversity brings diversity of thought brings innovation. And if we look at it from historical context, everyone has different roles. There's morning people and there's night people. The night people are night people because they were the ones that were typically up protecting the tribe at night from whatever could be happening. So when I say that it's not a safe space, some symbolism that I use in that is that you, within a tribe, so everyone has a sword and a shield, and you never use a sword inside the gates. And again, all metaphors, but the sword is only for external because you're conquering some kind of external threat.
Yeah.
Inside, you can use shields, and you can even use shields against each other. Because obviously we are humans. We do have vulnerabilities. We do have traumas, and so when I'm saying that it's not a safe space per se, I think there's for sure limits of how far you push it, but it's also a place where ultimately we're all agents of the business. So furthering the tribe concept, that's a very dangerous situation. We all need to eat. So if
Hmm.
someone's saying, I'm not going to perform because of XYZ reason, that's not acceptable. That person can be unapologetically pushed out of the tribe. So it's not a safe space in that regard. We're all defending our place in the tribe because we all have to be productive in that space. We all have to
Hmm.
add value to that space. But there are certain things that I'm good at, but likely many more than I'm really bad at. And
Hmm.
there are people that will be good at things that I'm not. You are a perfect example of this, that I'm not good at the stuff that you're good at, especially not at the level of proficiency that you are. And so you need different people to have those skill sets in order to complete the puzzle that makes up that tribe. An example of global trade is I used to use this as an example with my team, where you whiteboard a whole bunch of different countries because some people are very isolationist when it comes to trade. And
Hmm.
if someone's really, really good at manufacturing, but not so good at services, and then another country is really good at services, but not so good at manufacturing, and obviously that's an oversimplified version, or even farming, add that in there too, then a a country that is good at manufacturing but is not good at producing agricultural products, they could produce agricultural products, just not at the scale as of the other countries. So it makes sense to say, hey, if I can produce 3 t-shirts, 2 apples, and 1 hour of services, and then you can produce 10 hours of services and 15 apples but 1 t-shirt, it makes a lot more sense for you to be focusing in on either the services or the agricultural side. So long-winded way of saying that we need those skill sets in our organization, but it's not a safe space per se because they need to perform. So ultimately we're taking care of our people, giving that sense of belonging in the tribe with the underlying basis that there is the risk we could get kicked out.
So I want to touch on that because when you're saying it's not a safe space, are you talking about from external threat or internal threat of
Both.
getting kicked out? Okay, so because there is where I'm going to disagree with you. One, yes, there is external threat, right? But we even had that conversation about how I feel like there is enough need in the world where really there is no threat per se because people don't like companies don't buy from other companies. They build relationships or there's some kind of relation to the person that was selling the product, right? So I feel like there is already like no threat per se because if you build these relationships, if you hire the right people on your team that represents your company in a certain way, then the sales will come because the sale is going to happen between two people and they need to relate to each other. The other thing is, how do you get a sense of belonging if you don't feel safe? Then you're almost like in survival mode and you are just trying to survive, but you're not performing in the way that you would want that person to perform if you're constantly just surviving. So I think that you cannot have a workplace where you want them to feel like they belong, but not feel safe.
There was a military example. I don't remember where this was from, but I think it may have been from one of Simon Sinek's books. But he was following around a military group, and there was some senior officer that was demanding to know who was the person that did something wrong.
Mhm.
And I believe it was the sergeant that was in charge of the soldier that potentially did something wrong. It was interesting because part of the structure, part of military structure, is that the sergeant will be they're an enlisted soldier, but they're still in charge of a certain group. They're in charge of discipline and making sure that things happen. They're basically the doer of the organization, while the
Mhm.
officers are much more higher level strategy. And this senior officer was going up to the sergeant saying, "I want to know the name. You need to tell me right now." And the sergeant very respectfully said, "Sir, with all respect, if something happened, that's my fault." And again, the officer was very insistent. "You need to tell me who specifically did this. I need to know a name. I'm going to discipline them." And the sergeant again said, "Sir, with all respect, you may discipline me, but only I may discipline my men." And I love that concept. That's something that I've always followed, where, especially in corporations, we have all these layers of leadership where a lot of cases we'll be scared for our own sake. And so I think we're saying two separate things, but agree on the fundamentals of it. That the safe space, the sense of belonging, kind of the crux of our conversation, comes from knowing that your leadership has your back, that if I'm performing, if I'm doing what I need to do, even if I mess up in some way, if there's some kind of corrective action that can be done, then it should be able to be done. Potentially, I'm being too harsh by saying that companies are not a safe space, but there is always that underlying risk. We're not fully safe from that, right? We're not fully safe from harsh feedback. We're not fully safe from, even in some cases, getting feedback that we disagree with, or getting disciplinary action that we disagree with. Something that
Yeah.
may not be just in all cases. And I like what you said, that it starts with the leadership, because my viewpoint is any people leader, regardless of level, needs to be that sergeant, needs to be that person that says, "Look, my team's my team. I will protect them fiercely and take my job before you take theirs." If
Mhm.
I know I have a leader like that, then I will follow them to hell and back. And in many cases, I have had that in my career. I've had the opposite in my career as well.
I mean, I think we are agreeing, but where I was thrown off is the safe space, because maybe then the issue is not of not having a safe space, but more so like complacency and closed mindedness. Like, if you are complacent or you feel comfortable and that makes you underperform, then that's a different story. I think you should feel safe that your leadership has your back, like you explained in that example, um, and that you should always perform well and take feedback in a certain way. But it's also important how you receive that feedback, because you said like harsh feedback, right? I think there's a way to communicate feedback that empowers people versus makes them feel less than. So I think
Mhm.
safe space still is super important. Like, even if you're bringing it up in that scenario, I think where it becomes dangerous is where people are comfortable or complacent, and they think that the safe space or the safe environment, let's put it that way, will allow them to underperform or to not deliver, or to just feel so safe that nothing can happen to them. But I think it's just, for me, it's just the word that's throwing me off, because I'm very big on safe spaces.
Yeah.
So, yeah, especially at a place where you are spending so much time, right? Like, you
Mhm.
spend more time at work than you do with your family. So I want to feel safe. I want to feel like I belong, but I don't want to be enabled or complacent.
Mhm.
I want to grow.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, one of the ways to help that, when it talked about the enemy outside of the gate, that
Hmm.
the enemy, again, we're biologically programmed to defend against something. So if there's an enemy outside of the gate, that enemy could be anything. It could be a project that we're working on. It could be a deadline we're all trying to hit. It could be a competitor that we're trying to beat in a certain market. And that way we're not looking for an enemy internally, because ultimately, again, selfish creatures, we're looking at our own careers, we're looking at ourselves. We can form cliques in our organizations that degrades from the overarching goal of the organization. So for
Mhm.
me, one of the ways to get around that is to say, hey, team, this is the project, this is the thing, this is the clear, definable goal that we're all trying to reach. Let's figure out the steps to get there, and let's defeat each step along the way. Because when we
Mhm.
do that, we're all kind of jumping on board in a common way. And I kind of digress from the topic, but after 9/11, everyone was all bringing each other in, and they want to be close. And I've said before that I would never, ever, ever, ever want a 9/11 again, but I would give anything for a 9/12, when people
Mhm.
were coming together, kind of holding each other close, being much more understanding. And I think that, especially with our political climate, we've gotten away from that. And our organizations will reflect that, because ultimately, you have the same demographics on each side, that 50% believing one way, 50% believing in the other. And that's
Right.
very polarizing. That is not something we can belong in. And it's what group do we identify with first and foremost? Do we identify with our political affiliation? Do we identify with our race, with our religion, with any certain group or subgroup that we might be a part of?
Mhm.
I think that one of the solutions, not an easy solution, but one of the solutions is having a corporate culture where you identify yourself with that organization. I am part of this thing bigger than myself. And we collectively, although we may be different, have this in common. And
Yeah.
so, despite these differences, we know that we have a lot more in common in this space, especially for this time we're spending together.
Kind of off, I don't think that's off topic at all, because again, that goes back to safe space, right? Like, I have coworkers that I know for a fact have different political views,
Mhm.
and we can still work together, we can still be respectful towards each other. I think where it becomes quote unquote dangerous internally is when either one side feels like they're right and the other one's wrong. Like, obviously, even if my political views are different from the other person, I obviously think, okay, my political views might be quote unquote better because that's my personal belief. But I can't go into the workplace and shun people for their beliefs, right? So I still believe that if you have the safe space at work where you don't even need to talk about political views, but if it comes up, we can all share our views and be mindful of how we communicate them. Because if we point the finger and we start getting angry and we start calling names, like especially in politics, when we've watched all the debates and stuff like that, it was very mind boggling to me how when you're asked a question about what you believe about your side of the political view, it's always talking about the opposite sides and how they did something wrong.
Mhm.
Not really answering the question, right? Like, what is it about your point of view or your beliefs that made you choose this side? And it's generally just like because I don't agree with that side, which I think is ridiculous.
Mhm.
Always focusing on the other side, which quote unquote can be the enemy.
So, being able to disagree well, I think, is a skill that organizations with a strong culture of belonging foster. For instance, I used to work for Walmart, and one of their core beliefs is respect for the individual. So
Mhm.
ultimately, you have respect for the individual. And it's funny because if you consider how people disagree in any situation, if
Mhm.
you are having an argument with someone, then you're talking, 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 and like talking over the person. The person's not even done speaking, and you're already jumping in at a higher tone, and all this. You are escalating the energy. And
Mhm.
gosh, I'll forget the philosopher who said this, but it's not in argument or disagreement. It's not about being right. It's about getting it right. That's a reason why we debate. That we will debate different facts that it's not emotional. Functionally, that's why we have politics, is to avoid war. That we all want essentially the same thing, maybe the same thing in a broad topic of in politics, like the best country in the world. But the way to get there and potentially the definition of what that is might differ. But if we agree that we all have positive intent here, then at that point we can talk about facts of you believe this is the best way to get there in our corporations. If we have a disagreement, if we have a disagreement even with leadership, then like manager, you believe this is the best option to get there. We can either say no, it's not, and it's not because you are blah 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 blah. Or you could say something like, that's interesting. Let me understand how you got there. And
Yeah.
say, this is my perspective. Please coach me. Help me get better at this if I'm misunderstanding. These are the facts I'm seeing. And at that point, it's very non aggressive, and you can bring it in a way that everyone wants the same thing. Where in a lot of the talks I have with our clients about like building corporate cultures, especially building corporate cultures of belonging, I'll use those military examples because they're very emotionally charging. That you can picture what it would be like on a battlefield, even though if you were never in the military, if you never had any experience like that, you can understand. We've all seen enough movies to think, hey, if I was this character, then this would be a valuable thing for me. And there, if we are about to be entering into a dangerous situation where our lives are on the line, then we want to make sure we have the right information. We're doing these things the correct way, the best way possible. There's a famous former Navy SEAL, Jocko, who writes books on his experience. And much of what he talks about is having crystal clear communication. And I think that's important to belonging too, because I give a brief and say, we are doing this. And I'm using language that may be complicated. If I'm adding in details that don't need to be there, then no one's going to know, or there might be confusion in what we
Yeah.
do. And if we're all about to run into this building that we know that people are there looking to do us harm, that's pretty scary if we're not doing it the right way. So if we look at our
Yeah.
organizations in the way that we are all there essentially supporting each other's survival. We're supporting each other's survival through the performance of the business. The better we are at our roles, the more job security we have, and the more job security our tribe members, our team members have.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point, and we talked about that too, which is why we're recording this, because we have so many topics.
Mhm.
But communication, right? That's a core value. And I think when you become clear as a company about what your values are, and not the fluff, right? Like Googling good company values, like literally values that your company believes in and stands for, then we can disagree on many levels. But when
Mhm.
our values are the same, we can all move forward because we have a common goal. But that is the problem. That is the difficulty. I don't want to say problem. The difficulty when it comes to politics, different cultures, different experiences, because I think your values can shift based on that. Um, but it doesn't mean that we can't come together and agree on certain values. So again, I'm still going to disagree with you. I still believe there needs to be a safe place in
Mhm.
order to belong. It's almost like a step by step process. I need to be able to have this shared values, and then feel safe to express myself, and
Mhm.
then I can have a sense of belonging, and I can perform at my highest level. Like, just go back to like being a kid. If you are a kid at home and you don't feel safe at home because there's a certain expectation of you, and you can't communicate your challenges, you can't communicate um, why you don't understand something or why you did it a certain way because you fear retaliation or you feel criticism that is not empowering, then how are you going to deliver? How are you going to speak up about your differences? So we talked about this a lot, me being a woman of color at my job, there's certain things before 2020 I never talked about ever. I never brought up, right? And it was just because I didn't want to have those conversations at work because I feared retaliation. And it's not even that my thoughts were so negative or were like tearing someone else down. It was more so like, this is my experience. And even if you didn't have that experience, that doesn't mean that my experience is not true or
Mhm.
shouldn't be honored, right? So I think safe space is huge in the workplace, and communication in a empowering way is huge because you can tear someone down with your words or you can build them up.
Mhm. I like that. This may be able to help define solution for that. I know I want to have a corporate culture where share feedback with me. Never hold back negative feedback because I'm thinking we're going down path A and I'm going down full steam ahead. But there's someone who knows that's not the best path, or potentially it's not the right path whatsoever. You need to share
Right.
that. Bringing in crux of having a workplace of belonging is having a inclusive and equitable place of work that we can share those diverse experiences. We can talk about things. I remember I formerly had a manager that always said never discuss travel because travel made people seem that they were being pretentious. So there's a former team member of mine that formerly lived in China. And I think that's a fantastic experience. It's a great thing. You should be talking about that with everyone, especially people that have never, there's people that we work with that never had been on a plane before. So,
Yeah.
yes, bring up your experiences, talk about that, talk about other cultures. It's not elitist to share those experiences. And it's also not pessimistic to share negative experiences, especially if there's an added value to it. So, I think that you're definitely onto something of setting communication in order to have your expectations clear that this is a safe space 100% fully, and just don't do these things. It's like essentially as an example of like an ERG, how there can still be rules and guidelines for it. Any social media account has some kind of guidelines. If you can show where it adds value, you can share whatever it is.
Hmm. Yeah. But so I 100% agree. And what came up in my mind when you were talking about that is just like going back to the conversation about politics. If we don't make the conversation about the other person and more so about ourselves, like how did this make me feel or how did I perceive that versus this is what you did, this is how you said it, this is you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, right? Make it more about yourself than the other person. And then because no one can tell you how you should feel or how you should perceive or experience something, then we're taking ownership of that moment, of that experience, and we can address it in a way that is empowering to both, right? Because now I'm giving you information in a way that is not attacking you, but is telling you how we can improve our relationship.
I think that kind of goes back to your original point of making your values very clear. I'll use the company of Amazon, for example. They have a corporate culture of sharing candid feedback,
Yeah.
which can work out very well or can work out negatively. Because
Yeah.
in some cases, that's interpreted in the midst of a meeting, tear someone down. Or that could be a, hey, pull you to the side after the meeting. You did fantastic. These were the things of how I would have done differently. I had a colleague who used the term a lot that there are no ranks, there are only titles. I think organizations do themselves a disservice when they don't include titles in their emails, which I think is both cool and silly at the same time. It's cool because they'll put something generally fun like baker, book reader, adventurer, whatever. I even actually do this on my LinkedIn or even Instagram. Like I'll put in different things rather than just a title, right? Because the title is just one part of the person. You can get a deeper sense of who you're speaking with by knowing those factors. But if a C suite executive contacts me, I know my communication styles is going to be far different than if a technician contacts me. If someone
So why?
is potentially this is speaking from a consultant perspective, but if I have an executive of a company that says, "Hey, I have this question. I'm going to make it short and it's going to be exactly what they need in order to answer that question." That's not going to take them a lot of time to digest or anything like that. It'd be very quick. But someone who's in the details of it all day, I might give the why behind the what. I could give the background of it, and that can give a lot more substance because that's what they need for their role in our organizations. In our journey to create a culture of belonging, we do stuff like
Mhm.
that. And ultimately, it doesn't really work out well in reality. That it sounds cool to not have any titles and that, hey, we're all equal people here. But the reality is that the roles are different. So, for instance, if someone in IT contacts you and someone from HR contacts you and someone from finance contacts you and they ask you a question, there is a whole backstory of why they may be asking that very specific question. There's
Yeah.
context in their role in what they do that you'll want to respond to them. So when we avoid titles, it may make some of us feel more comfortable, but
Yeah.
ultimately, if we are too either detailed or casual in our conversations for certain people at certain levels, it the reality is it could be career limiting and can decrease the effectiveness of whatever objective was trying to be completed.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I was thinking about that's so like I get what they're doing with removing the titles. I think the person sending the email should take a little responsibility too because
Mhm.
here's the thing, if I get an email from someone that I don't know and it's a one sentence question, right? I don't think I would look at maybe I would look at the signature line and be like, "Oh, who's that person? Why are they reaching out to me?" But I would still ask certain questions in return that will help me answer the question in a better way. So
Mhm.
let's say if a CEO or any other title below the CEO would reach out to me with the same question that doesn't really give me a lot of information about how I should respond or how much detail I should provide. I just think that's it's very difficult. I think you can't decide based on the title, and more so like I would put responsibility on the sender
Mhm.
more so than on the receiver.
No, I like that a lot of being able to say like, "Hey, here's a bit of context of what I'm looking for."
Yeah. The reason I asked you why would you do it differently is because I was
Mhm.
like, are you respecting the time of a CEO more than the time of, you know, someone beneath a CEO or beneath is a horrible word, but
Mhm.
has a different title? And I feel like it should be equal when it comes to that, right? Like just provide just as much context to the CEO than you would to anybody else and
Mhm.
vice versa, but that wasn't the reason why you did that. So I can't
Mhm.
say, I'm not going to say
No.
that.
Yeah, so what you said right there was actually very interesting, and I may disagree about how someone's time of people's time of different levels are equal. And a big piece that I always refer to in the mobility space is kind of the cost of wasted time. That if you
Mhm.
are sending an executive to somewhere, we all have a certain cost per hour, even if we aren't being paid hourly. If it's just based on a salary, understood that it's probably a 40-hour work week or somewhat close to that. The cost per hour of an executive level employee is much more than a technician. And
Mhm.
not that on a human level there is much of a difference, because again, there's no difference in rank, only title. For the CEO, I'm not going to write them a dissertation. They wouldn't want to read it. They don't have time to read it, and they likely wouldn't read it. So if we're trying to deliver any points in that regard, we need
Mhm.
to be cognizant of who we're speaking with. And if we're going to boil that down back to the point of belonging in the workplace, we should be able to communicate with anyone. Again, using Walmart as an example, they have an open door policy that they use in order to promote some of this. Obviously, there's many cases when it can't always work, and when things are nicer in thought rather than in practice.
Mhm.
But when we know that just because we've all had bad managers in the past. So even
Mhm.
if I have a bad experience with my leadership, with my manager, or even the manager above them or above them, that there's someone else that we can go and talk to. Again, using the political model of I'm coming with facts and debate. that I'm not doing this to be right. I'm doing this to get it right. And
Hmm.
if I'm wrong, correct me. And if I'm not, then we need to be able to point out and identify who those negative people are in our leadership teams or within even our nuclear team, our immediate team that we need to address.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't think that you really disagreed with me, but more
Mhm.
so you just shared a different perspective, like a different viewing it from a different lens, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're speaking from that perspective and that lens, then yes, I agree with you. I'm not going to write a paragraph to the CEO that doesn't care about the context of it and just
Mhm.
wants the answer, right? Um, this is why I asked the question, why? And when you
Mhm.
provided the context, it made sense to me. But yeah, the I mean, we talk about this a lot, but I think this is why it's so important for training. Like, it doesn't matter what level you are, you can always improve your communication skills, your leadership skills, and so on. And not in a traditional way where I think this whole leadership perspective is has completely been taken out of context. Like, there are beautiful quotes about how, leaders should lead the way and all of this stuff, but most of them understand it as, let me tell you which way to go. But it
Mhm.
literally is supposed to be an example, right, of how to communicate, how to empower, how to you're more of a servant of your employees than
Mhm.
you think that your employees are a servant of you, right?
Mhm.
So there, yeah, and I think you always have to improve that on a
100%.
regular basis.
100%. And I think there's certain ways that we can help point out where the errors are. And so whenever we're in a conflict situation, any point of conflict, then our personality types come out. And generally our core beliefs come out. We drop the veil of professionalism in a lot of cases. That's when people might start some infighting, and that's usually the worst time for infighting to occur. In some cases, it
Right.
may not be something for the entire team. It may be, I'm going through something very vulnerable right now, and this is all very triggering to me in this sense, right?
Right.
And but if you
Mhm.
can create a artificial sense of urgency for something, even setting a deadline a couple days early and everyone's crushing to get that deadline done. I like personality assessments that will show kind of where you go stressing, where you go when you're your baseline, because if we all have a baseline, sometimes we're above it, sometimes we're below it. What are we doing in different situations? That
Mhm.
if we have a deadline, if something feels catastrophic, and biologically, our fight or flight response kicks in, and we react as we would at our most primal levels, and that
Mhm.
reveals so much about the person in both their strengths and their weaknesses.
Right.
And it's a time when the most conflict and friction can happen. So many times when we do team builders, we'll do team builders in the sense of like, oh, let's go do this volunteer project, which I think is fantastic. I think that most organizations need to do more of that.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
yeah, I'll say, but dot dot dot. That's not really a team builder. That's something that they all went together. They felt good about themselves, and that was it. A team builder could be something like an escape room where you need to go around, there's a deadline of some kind, you need to find information, you need to disseminate what that information is and then put it into practice so people will fall into the roles that they will organically go into because we have the artificial sense of, oh my gosh, the door won't open if we don't get this point. Or if
Yeah.
we have a stretch project. I'm also a big fan of projects that might be outside of the normal sequencing of what we'll do in our yearly goals. That I generally always advise to have a different category, even if we have our standard categories of goals that might go to the competencies of the role or goals of the organization. Let's go ahead and make another goal that is, I'll say, fun. It's for fun. It's not something that is directly required, but it will be a direct benefit to the organization, direct benefit to the team, and that will allow the creative minds and the the different personality types to add the value of their diversity towards that
Mhm.
project with an artificial deadline, because we're not trying to meet the deadline of a customer or the deadline of something compliance related or anything else. We have this deadline, we have to meet this deadline because we all agree we have to meet this deadline, and it
Mhm.
does the same thing biologically to us, that oh my gosh, we need to do this, like everyone's watching, this is still on my goals, so it still is important for my performance review. I feel the same
Yeah.
vulnerability towards it, but they will really excel if they're always defending against that enemy and looking to defeat that enemy.
Yeah. I'm gonna go back to the escape room. I'm just letting you know right now. If we ever go to an escape room, then you rely on me. It's gonna be a problem because I suck at escape rooms. But I'm good at like talking you up, like making you feel good. So I'm here to
Mhm,
empower you and be your best self, right?
mhm,
But yeah, I not good at that. But to that point, deadlines are great. I really I believe in deadlines, but I think that there has to be more than just a deadline. Like there has to be accountability and relationship building to meet that deadline. Because again, let's go back to the safe space
mhm.
conversation. This conversation was not even supposed to be about safe space, was it?
Oh, it's about belonging, right? So, in
Well,
order to
I
feel like
think
you
it's part
belong,
of
you
it.
need to feel
Yeah,
safe.
yeah. Which, yeah, I agree with. So anyway, I think that if you don't feel safe and you have a deadline, even if it's a common goal, again, I don't think that you will perform at the highest level, because if you are struggling with something or you can't move past a certain part of whatever that part is for you and you don't feel safe to communicate that, not only I think will you underdeliver, but you will also not help the team by not speaking up and by not having that relationship with whoever you are supposed to provide the end result to. So
Mhm,
I think it's good to have relationships that have a solid foundation where you can have conversations about struggles, questions, and so on. So, for example, with my team, we have a standing weekly call. And even if there is nothing to talk about, we will still meet just to keep that relationship going, right? So, for example, now with COVID, there's a lot of things happening on their side, a lot of things happening on my side that don't necessarily intertwine. We speak on a weekly basis to make sure that we stay connected, right? And
mhm.
most times, I would say 9 times out of 10, on these calls, something will come up that we had no intentions on talking about and we're solving for something. So, more so than deadlines, I think relationships are just as crucial, maybe
Mhm.
even more important.
Yeah. So, how do you feel about socializing with your team, and especially direct reports? Do you think that that helps or hurts the business relationship?
I don't think, this is my favorite thing to say. There's nothing black and white. Okay. It
Mhm,
depends on the person. Values and boundaries are, for me, core values. And as long as you know how to communicate your values and your boundaries, um, it helps build whatever that relationship is. I've had to have very tough conversations with my direct reports, and I always started them off in first checking in with that person to
mhm,
see, is there anything happening in their life or is there anything happening in general that is, you know, why I had to have this conversation, why maybe the person is underperforming or not doing something in the way that they should. And once we have cleared that out the way, right? And generally, I build that relationship where they feel safe enough to tell me, but I want to make sure that they feel safe enough to come to me proactively. Like, I don't want it to be at the point where I feel like I have to come talk to you. You know what I mean?
mhm.
So, there are pros and cons because there could be things that I say that will offend my direct report, right? So, core values and boundaries are important.
No,
Did I answer your
I love.
question?
Yeah, no, totally. That's interesting. I totally agree. And actually, to further that point, one of one of the things that I usually like to follow within myself, or again, advising clients, is I'll say that keep, well, so socializing is awesome. Being able to connect on a human level, because that's what builds trust, right? If I'm in the trenches with someone, I want to know that I, I appreciate them as a human, right? Because
Yeah.
again, we spend more time with them than our own families, so they become our family. That's the
Yeah.
purpose of the tribe. We need to have that trust. We need to have that bond. We need to have the shared struggle that we go through, and part of the shared struggle is the shared enjoyment of life.
And we
And
don't like everybody in our family either. So
well, it's true. And the one kind of, I'll put an asterisk next to that, that fine print will be always retain something magical about yourself. And that is usually, it doesn't need to be something mysterious, but it could be something that you're just really, really good at. Something that no
mhm.
one understands how you're able to do this thing so well. And ultimately, someone will always respect you for that. And it's the additional piece that no matter how human you are, you're superhuman in this regard. That they
Mm.
know if someone's very, very good at data analytics, let's say, then that person essentially has a magical power. And that's why I say retain something magical about yourself. Because to them, they can do it standing on their head. It's not a challenge. But
Yeah.
to everyone else, that is an extreme skill, which it
Mhm.
is an extreme skill. That's why they have the role. They are a specialist in that regard. So in having and in honing and developing both within the organization and outside the organization, your personal time, making sure that special skill that you have, or potentially multiple skills, it appears magical because it's so strong, then
Yeah.
you will retain not only the social respect, but the
Mhm.
professional respect of your coworkers. Because again, we've all had those coworkers that we liked a lot. We may want to go grab a drink with them on the weekend, but if there's a deadline, we probably wouldn't want them working on the same project as us. So, but if they are that person that we would enjoy hanging out with outside of the workplace, and we know that they are really, really good at something or multiple things, then no matter what, we know at the end of the day, I feel comfortable defending that person. If someone comes up and says something negative about them, I'm not going to let anyone say anything negative about them. And that, again, culture of belonging. Again, we had a recent conversation about that, of how certain play when someone says something negative about someone in the workplace, it's everyone's
Mhm.
responsibility to shut that down immediately. And you feel
Yeah.
a lot more comfortable shutting that down immediately if you highly respect the person, even if it's for something very specific.
Yeah.
I'll use an example even within my career, where I've had leadership that I may be disagreeing with what they're doing, but if I
Mhm.
can respect them and respect certain things about them, then I'll follow them to the gates of hell and back. And
Mm.
there actually was a quote, I really appreciated this. One of our team members mentioned it. It said, "I would follow you to the gates of hell with a water pistol." And I thought that was such a cool, like, such cool symbolism. It's like, gates of hell, they're very fiery. With a water pistol? That's, dang, okay, great. Appreciate that. But it's having that sense that no matter what, I have your back. You can even simulate those situations with your team if you want to correct that action. If you want to have a culture of belonging, then you can go up to someone in posing a question that didn't really happen, and obviously in a respectful way, not spreading rumors yourself, but in seeing if someone is looking to gossip or if they're looking to shut it down really quickly. That's a solid test. It's almost like a
Yeah.
secret shopper type thing for your team in order to ensure that, hey, this is our audit, that we, what our values
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Leadership lives those values. The team says they live those values. Here's our audit. Well, let's go and run tests to see first, anonymous surveys. How's everyone feeling? Second is real world scenarios. Send a member from an outside team and ask some questions of, like, what's the deal with that person? Something that would be kind of a provocative statement to see if they're going to start gossiping. And if that is the case, then correct it real quick. And then in the future, if anyone does gossip or feel the need to, then they're going to be questioning of, oh gosh, is this person one of the auditors that you might be
Yeah.
having to deal with.
And like I'm thinking about the personal relationships that I have with my direct reports because I think this is really difficult because at work, obviously, you have to keep it professional and
Mhm,
you also want to respect the core values, but we're also dealing with humans.
mhm,
So when you build that relationship with someone and you have common interests and you can even hang out with them on the weekend, it can feel very natural for someone to come to you and quote unquote gossip about another
mhm,
person. And in a personal setting, it would probably be, oh, really? And like feeding into it. And then you have to switch it up at work. So that's where I think that's where it gets really tricky. So that's where boundaries come in, right? Like making sure that you understand that we have a different relationship at work than we do outside. But
mhm.
it's really difficult because like are you being authentic then? You're not really being your authentic self at work
Mhm.
because you're saying I have to wait until 5 o'clock before we have this conversation. So
No, that's a good point, and that's well, it's all dependent on what the gossip is. Of
yeah, true.
if we're talking about something that's going to
Nothing's black and white.
yes, yeah, if we're diminishing the respect of the individual, then that is not something that we do in any
Right,
way. Big
right.
thing in corporations doing something referred to as calibration during performance reviews, and this is one of the issues of even teams within the same structure. They'll go into a
Hmm.
room and say, how do we make sure that we're selecting a few of the true top performers, again, calibrated on the bell curve against their peers?
Yeah.
Then gossip there can really, really hurt. And
Hmm.
that then also impacts the sense of belonging because if your performance reviews are coming back negatively, and especially if some of your peer teams are coming back higher, then obviously you're not going to feel very engaged. We
Yeah.
already know that only 40% of corporate work is actually spent on productive tasks because we do other things, water cooler talk or surf the web or go on LinkedIn, stuff like that. So if we're maximizing that 40% and hopefully getting it higher than that, then we want to make sure that when it comes time to reward our team by giving them essentially a report card of how they did this past year.
Yeah.
It's funny because in corporate settings, I've had some of the years that I felt like I did the worst. I somehow always got the best performance review, and the
Really?
years it's insane. I don't well, it shows how subjective it is because ultimately I'm the one who actually knows what performance I was doing, right? That like the
Yeah,
effort
yeah.
I was putting in, and even if we would look at it objectively through standards of what was accomplished that year versus other years that potentially more than I'd ever done before. And then it was, oh, you're doing all right. You're a solid performer. Wait, we haven't like as a team we haven't done this in the past 5 years, and so
Yeah.
in seeing that it's fascinating to see how subjective that is, and that
Yeah.
goes directly to the point of belonging.
So this is I don't know if this is realistic or not of what I'm about to say, but this is why I believe that the relationship between a leader and their direct reports is so important. If you have 30 direct reports, there is no way that you can build relationships and to the point where you are actually making your direct reports better. So if I have a performance review and I think I'm doing good for 6 months. And then I sit down with my manager, and my manager's like, well, you failed here, 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 and here, right? I don't
Mhm.
think it's fair for me to find out during my performance review that I am failing for the past 6 months.
Yes.
So it shouldn't be a surprise that when you go into a performance review, that there are going to be things that have a lower score.
Mhm.
Um, I never want to be blind spotted like that. Like blindsided is the right word.
Mhm.
Blind spotted.
Mhm.
But so that I hate to say it
Mhm.
is almost a failure on the manager, right?
Hmm.
But depending on the situation, nothing's black and white. If you are
Hmm.
in a company where you have 30 direct employees, then obviously that's not your fault. That
Hmm.
goes further up, right? But for me, I don't want my employees to find out during the performance review that they did poorly in certain areas. And I want to be intentional about building that relationship because ultimately, even if I am their leader and they report to me, I'm there to make them better for the organization.
Hmm.
And if
Sure.
they're not doing that and I am not bringing those things up with them on a regular basis, that's 6 months wasted. And what does that cost the company?
Hmm. That's spot on. And actually, this might be helpful for that. So, one of the things I do is rather than, because obviously you brought up the 6 months that we have our mid-year reviews and our annual reviews most typically. Some organizations do quarterly reviews, but and we brought up even one-on-ones before that. I think kind of categorically, one-on-ones are meant for the development of the individual employee. It should not be the time for them to update their manager of what they're working on. That should be a separate time. Secondarily to that, I'm a big fan of monthly manager update reports. So each month, the employee will fill out what they're working on, what their challenges are, what their deadlines are, where they're maybe missing something, where they may be ahead of
Yeah.
something. Any of the factors of what they're working on, generally goal specific, but then some additional areas. Then at the end of the year, we're not scratching our heads of thinking, "Oh gosh, so like, what did you do?" Like, fair, go back through our
Yeah.
emails and figure that out. Especially if you have multiple direct reports, and then when it
Yeah.
comes to calibration, it's a this is what my team did. Any questions? Does your team have this? And
Yeah.
did your team accomplish these goals? Because there we have it could be even a challenge that came up, a challenging customer client that they were working with, something that
Yeah.
they solved, something that they found, something that was not goal specific. And then for me, at that point, I'm looking at 12 pieces of paper and then remembering certain things. And when we have our team meetings, we can even discuss some of those monthly manager updates if
Yeah.
the person wants to share. And a lot of that can help teach the team of, oh gosh, I dealt with this really difficult situation this past
Mhm.
month. This is how I solved it. This was the result. And
Yeah.
people can learn from each other. And again, performance review, I'm not going through an inbox, especially with multiple directs. I can look at those pieces of paper, know the facts, then
Yeah.
add my opinion on it, which that's functionally what some of it is. Some of it inevitably is subjective, but we have all the facts for the objective. And again, for calibration, for things like promotions, for things like backing up even our personnel budgets,
Mhm.
that this is what we did specifically. If you want to see this in the spreadsheet, we will build a beautiful report. But it's much more impactful than a yeah, they did a really good job this year. Like what they do? Oh, well they accomplished these 5 goals.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 goals in 12 months. Like what else?
Yeah.
And because there's so much more throughout the year, even if we set some significant projects. But I do want to be mindful of time in this. So if you have any final thoughts, and then also what your key takeaways of our conversation are. So if you would boil down your tips to help organizations build a greater culture of belonging, what would they be?
So, clearly communicating your values, making sure that you have a consistent relationship building with the team and and training for people to constantly advance their consciousness and their communication skills and their personal skills, whatever they're hired for, giving people the opportunity to become better and creating a safe space to
Mhm.
be able to communicate if things are challenging or not working the way that they should. Yeah, and create that tribe like environment where my role might be different from yours, but my role is just as important as yours. And I respect you for what you do, and you respect me for what I do, and we can still come together and support each other. Yeah, creating that type of environment, I think, is crucial for a healthy culture.
Mhm. I entirely agree. And I would kind of echo a few of those points. I think mine would be off the top of my head strong communication, of making sure that your communication is entirely clear. That includes for career pathing and to know if I want this promotion, what do I need to do to get
Mhm.
there? Clear communication about company performance and expectations, understanding a lesson that you taught me in this conversation of where the safe space is. So this is an area where you don't need to be concerned about what you share, and as a matter of fact, you're probably encouraged to share it. Then managing your performance reviews with things like the monthly manager updates, and then doing a team audit of the core values, that if people are not feeling like they're actually being followed and being adhered to, then bring in an external business partner that's not on your team, that's unbiased, that doesn't have the same frame of reference, and
Yeah.
they can give a much more objective opinion, because they may not even have the context of thinking like, oh, I thought those people didn't get along. Oh no, they're actually best friends, but it just because of banter back and forth and stuff like that.
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that because we're gonna
Awesome.
go into a whole nother conversation if I don't.
Well, I will look forward to our next one. So
Me
thank you
too.
so much. And thank you everyone for watching. I hope that you enjoyed our kind of chit chat back and forth. Again, this was a bit of a test case since we have these conversations a lot, and we figured that there might be some value whenever we do have these conversations just to hit record on them. So thank you all for watching. And again, Margaret, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you.